Meet Reggie. The alarm blares over the intercom as there's another mechanical issue. Reggie rushes to the floor. Steam rises from the conveyor while some are shouting over the alarm, others are standing idle. Deadlines are looming. Corporate is breathing down Reggie's neck, and every second lost is costing thousands of dollars. Reggie's jaw tightens as he thinks, why can't we just get this right? Reggie's the plant manager at a mid-sized food processing facility, and he takes pride in his work. He's worked at this plant for over 25 years. He started on the line, packing frozen vegetables, to now running a team with over 200 people. But lately, the hum of the machines has been replaced by complaints, stress, and mounting tensions. Supply chain delays have created chaos with the schedule. Veterans are burning out. New hires are quitting in the first season. And corporate keeps asking for more efficiency, more output, more results. It feels like Reggie is holding back a dam that's about to burst. Just last week, at one of the shift meetings, one of the newer employees was complaining about working too many hours with unrealistic quotas. Without even knowing it, Reggie snapped. You think you have it hard? Try running this place. The silence afterwards stung worse than his outburst. Later that evening, Reggie walked the dim plant after everyone left, feeling remorse, feeling guilt for how he's been behaving. He feels torn between empathy for his employees and the pressure to perform. Not only that, he's realizing that he hasn't been taking care of himself. He hasn't been exercising, he's skipping meals, and he's not getting enough sleep. How much longer can Reggie carry the weight without breaking? Today, I'm chatting with Mark Black, who is a resilience expert, coach, and award-winning author. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how Mark would help someone like Reggie to be able to turn adversity into advantage, how to cut through the excuses and build resilience that lasts. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Mark, we're going to get into Reggie's story here in a bit, but I want to hear your story because I've read a lot about what you've gone through in your life and some of the health challenges that you've had to work through. Would you mind sharing your story?
Sure, Jay. Yeah, pleasure to be here, and happy to share. I will go back to the beginning, but I promise we won't go through every year of my life. But I have to go back to the beginning just because it gives the context of kind of where we're going. So I was born with a life-threatening heart defect. I had open heart surgery. I was medevaced by helicopter from where I was born to a children's specialty hospital 3 hours away, within hours of birth, and had open heart surgery when I was 1 day old. And then I had another surgery when I was a year old. And then doctors kind of told my then 25-year-old parents, um, get ready because he's going to have a long road. And I kind of lived in and out of hospitals for the better part of a couple of years, and then was followed regularly by cardiologists for most of my childhood and adolescence. And then finally, when I was 24, kind of everything culminated. Everything, things hit the fan, as they say. And I was experiencing shortness of breath. I was tired all the time. I was a 24-year-old guy, so I ignored symptoms for way longer than I should have because I was young and invincible. And finally went to the doctor. And long story short, he ran all the tests and said, "You need a heart and two new lungs like yesterday. And if you don't get a transplant, you are not going to be around much longer." So we began the transplant process. I was really lucky that a medical team in Toronto was willing to kind of take a flyer on me and put me on the transplant list because I was a high risk patient. And a few months later, my dad and I moved halfway across the country. I'm on the east coast of Canada, so we moved halfway across the country to Toronto to start waiting for this transplant. I waited on the list for the better part of a year. The last 6 months of that year were spent in the hospital because my condition was so fragile that they didn't trust leaving me outside of the hospital. So I lived there for 6 months from April until September of 2002. And then on September the 6th, 2002, received a new heart and two new lungs.
Wow. And what, I guess, what happened after that? You get the new got a new heart. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of recovery period. Walk me through the next steps after that, and that's over what, 23 years ago now,
And
huh?
coming up on 23 years next week. Yeah. So you get a heart and lung. The recovery from the surgery itself was long. I mean, I was out of the hospital 2.5 weeks later, but then it was a long road physically to just get back to some level of health and fitness. But slowly but surely, I was able to do that. I would say by 6 months out, I was in better shape than before the surgery. By a year out, I was in better shape than I'd been in 10 years.
Mm.
Um, and then 2.5 years after the transplant, I ran my first marathon. I run four of them. Um, and I really did it as like a dare to myself. I just wanted to kind of see what the new body was capable of doing. And I thought, if I could run a marathon, then I kind of tell myself I can do anything that I put my mind to. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Mark, not many people have this kind of experience in life where you were very much at death's door, right? I mean, that's scary. When you reflect back on this, what do you think are the lessons that it taught you?
Wow. Yeah. So many. Uh, I mean, first of all, obviously, anytime you deal with illness, whether it's your own or somebody close to you, or you lose somebody close to you, I think it reframes what really matters, right? It kind of reminds us at the end of the day, what are the things that really count? And it's a pretty small list, right? Most of the things that we stress about every day are really, in the grand scheme, not that important. And illness is a great way of reminding you of that. There's a saying, I don't remember who gets credit for it, but they say when you're healthy, you have a dozen priorities, and when you're sick, you have one. Um, and it's so true. My days in hospital were just consumed with staying alive uh, till the next day. Right? It was really like a day by day. Can we make it? And there's a stress in that, but there's also a freedom in that to be able to just kind of go. Everything else doesn't matter. All I'm focused on is this one thing. Um, and so I try now to kind of have more of that perspective. Obviously, you still have to live life, pay bills, do all those things, but
Mhm.
I try and have that perspective of like, is this going to matter next week when I'm stressed about something, right? Is this going to matter in 30 days? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't deserve the same level of anxiety and stress and concern as something that will matter in 30 days.
Yeah.
So I think perspective is huge. But I mean, look, I learned a lot of things. Um, seven of which became a framework for a book that I wrote later uh, about resilience. That I learned that the resilience and overcoming adversity is not really about the result. I mean, the ending of the story sounds cool, but it's really about what you learned on the path to that result that is where all the juice is.
Yeah. Well, what inspired you to wanna then share this with others? I mean, you went through it, and now you've written books on it, you speak on it. I guess what was the fuel behind that?
Totally an accident. I'd love to say it was a grand purpose. I came home after my transplant, about a year after the transplant. Actually, when It's when SARS happened. I know we've all been through COVID. We forget we had this other pandemic because
Yeah.
it didn't affect as many people, fortunately, but it was rampant in Toronto, and it was a respiratory illness, and so somebody with a lung transplant, it was incredibly dangerous. So that was when I said, I'm out of here. I'm coming back home to the East Coast where there's less people and less chance of catching this. And I got an invitation to speak at a high school graduation. So the little 10-minute presentation that some random guest speaker gives to kids right before they go party that night. And I remember thinking, these kids don't care what I have to say. Like, they just want to go party after graduation.
Yeah.
But I'm going to try and give them something, like maybe I'll give them one or two ideas. And so I wrote my little 10 minutes, and I don't know if I made an impact on the kids, but I had one of the parents at the reception afterwards came up to me gushing and wanted to hire me to speak at his company. And I didn't know what was happening. I was like, well, he asked me for my business card. I'm like, I don't have a business card. I work at an insurance company on like taking phone calls from people processing insurance claims. I'm like, what do you mean my business card? And he says, well, that's what you do, right? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you speak. And I said, people do that? Like, what are you talking about? And he said, yeah, we bring people into my company to do what you just did. And I think we pay them a lot of money. And I said, tell me more about that. Right? Like, what are you talking about? And so that guy launched my career. Like, I went back home and started Googling, like, how to be a speaker. And
Wow.
here I am 20 years later.
Yeah, well, I think that the success you've had since is because the story that you share is one that is incredibly inspiring, and also it sounds like you've also put together some frameworks that are applicable to anyone who's in an environment where there's a lot of demand, which is what we see everywhere. We're finding ways, right, to do more with less,
Yeah,
ask more of people. So this is important to so many people in the workforce. So tell me a little bit about what you see in what it takes to be resilient in these environments. I know you said there are some frameworks there, but I'll just open it up to ask you what what is resilience in your mind, and then we'll take it from there.
sure. So I always say the resilience is about growing through, not bouncing back. So we talk a lot about resilience in the framework, or in the sense of we're going to bounce back from adversity, right? Some bad thing happens, quote unquote bad thing happens, and we're going to recover. And nothing wrong with that. I mean, we want to get back up when we fall. But ideally, we're not just returning to what was before. We're in some way better than we were. In some way, hopefully we've learned something. I have a firm belief that you are who you are. I am who I am, not in spite of, but because of the biggest challenges we've faced. When you talk to somebody who's had some life experience, they've been shaped by the stuff they've had to live through, right? For better or worse, hopefully for better. And so that's to me what resilience is. It's taking the things that could have been the reason why you didn't do something, the reason why you didn't have success, the reason why you didn't find happiness, and you use it as the very reasons why you did. And you leverage them so that you're not just recovering from them, but you're learning from them. And so that's what the whole resilience framework that I teach is all about. It's about helping people to say, look, we have like, well, we go through COVID. Okay, well, we realize in 2021, 2022, that we're not returning to life as it was in 2019. Like, that world is gone forever, right?
Hmm.
For better or worse, it just is. It's different. And so we can either try and bring back the past, try and say, remember the good old days, or we can say, okay, we have this new reality. How am I going to do things differently? Right.
Hmm.
And now we're living in a world 3 years later where it's changing all over again, right? We have AI and it's going to change the whole world, and the rate of change continues to increase. And those who are trying to hold on to what was or even what is with a firm grasp are going to cause themselves stress, anxiety, frustration, and they're going to get left behind. And so resilience is really about adapting through the challenges that we face.
I think that is you hit the core of what holds people back from being able to manage through adversity, and it is to hold on to what is or what was the way you just described it. And it's resistance, essentially. It's resistance, right? To resist change, to be telling yourself and others that the way it was or the way it is better than what is happening through things that are outside of one's control. So I guess it is about control then, isn't it, Mark? It's about control. It's about wanting to control that which is outside of your control.
100%, right? So the the two probably most resonant steps in the book of like the seven steps in the framework, the two that resonate most powerfully with people are accept, which is the third step, and adapt, which is the fourth step. And so we start with acceptance, and the acceptance piece is saying, okay, we cannot control everything in our environment, and intellectually we know that, but emotionally we act differently, right? We pretend, or we like to delude ourselves into believing that we can, right? And increasingly, look, we live in a world where, I mean, you and I have conveniences and the ability to control our environment at a level that our grandparents could not imagine, right? The level of convenience and power at our fingertips to do things and make things happen quickly that were not around even 50 years ago is incredible. And look, that's not a bad thing, except when we take it for granted and it becomes so part of our reality that we forget that it's not necessarily all that normal, and that it doesn't mean we can control all of it, right? So the fact that I can, do things at my fingertips, the fact that I can have food delivered to my door, that I can order something I need and it arrives 2 days later, that I can do online banking, that like you name, I can book travel all over the world in a couple of clicks. Like the convenience level is crazy. It makes us feel powerful, whether we recognize that or not. We feel like we're just kind of puppet masters of our life. But then you get
Yeah.
hit with an illness or something like COVID happens, or there's an economic downturn that like kicks your business's butt, and you realize, oh wait, I'm not God, right? I don't get to just push buttons and everything happens. Now what am I going to do? And that's when we have to recognize that there are aspects of every day that are outside of our control, and learn to let go of that so that we don't drive ourselves crazy. Number one, but number two, so that we don't waste the two most critical resources we have at our disposal every day. So I talk about this concept in the book called closing the gap between oh no and now what. And what I mean by that is anytime there is a moment of adversity, a problem, a challenge, we have a moment of oh no, like oh no, this thing happened, right? So oh no, I got fired. Oh no, somebody in my family got sick. Oh no, COVID is taking over the world. Oh no, my AI is going to steal my job. Whatever the oh no is. And then there's a moment later on where we say, okay, now what? Like, what action am I going to take? How am I going to respond? Well, in between those 2 points, there's a gap. And that gap can last for 10 seconds or 20 years,
Mm.
depending on how we respond. And in that gap, we are going to spend time and we're going to spend energy. And that shows up like worry and anxiety and fear and frustration and resentment and resistance and all of those negative things. And so, our job to me in being more resilient is, can we close that gap? Now
Mm.
we'll never close it like it's gone, right? I always say, my joke is, unless you're a monk that meditates on a mountain 23 hours a day, I don't think you ever gain perfect acceptance of everything.
Right.
Right? Like my joke is, I teach this stuff every day. I try and live it every day. I still get angry in traffic sometimes when someone cuts me off. Like, that's human.
I was thinking about that exact analogy right before you said it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think that's just human.
Yeah.
And the reflex is okay. The question is, what do you do after the reflex? Right?
Yeah.
Do I
Yeah.
carry, like, I'm driving to work in the morning, the person cuts me off, I go, "Ugh, okay." Like, I'm not gonna shame myself for doing that. Am I gonna carry that "ugh" for the rest of the day, or am I gonna leave it at that traffic light?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Absolutely. You framed something just now. I never really heard it that way. And I want to ask you to dive into it a bit more. It is because we have been trained in our society today to have this illusion of control and convenience. It actually has made it harder for when reality comes in and smacks us in the face and says, you don't have the control that you think you had. I never really thought of it that way, Mark. Because and you're right. It's like, okay, it may actually have, I don't want to say it would have been better, but it would be different if we never had that sense of power, because there would be no illusion of control for us to cling on to. And so what is then required is to then train yourself emotionally to realize that you don't really have the control that you think you have.
I absolutely couldn't have said it better. Yeah, we are our primitive part of our brain, which is where our emotional brain lives, has not evolved to catch up with our day-to-day reality, right? Like this part of our brain is still afraid of being eaten by dinosaurs, right? And yet we're living in a world with smartphones. And so there's this disconnect, right? And so we have to help ourselves and remind ourselves that there's an aspect of our life that is still about not getting eaten by dinosaurs. Like there's still stuff in the world that's going to impact us that we can't predict or control. All we can do is be emotionally equipped and mentally fitness wise equipped as best as we can to deal with it. I talk about just like making sure that your toolkit has lots of tools in it, right? And making sure that those tools are sharpened so that when you need them, you're ready. Like the time to build resilience is not when you're in the middle of a crisis. It's it's loading the toolbox before you're in the crisis so that when it hits, you're ready to deal with it. And so that I talk about the next piece of after acceptance is adaptability. It's about how do we become more adaptable? Well, we practice, right? We live in a world where you don't if you choose not to, you can be you can get by without being too adaptable. At least we could until maybe a couple of years ago. I don't think that's going to be true for very much longer. Uh, and so that means again, it's a tool that's not being sharpened. If you're not practicing it, you're not going to be as good at it. How do you become super adaptable? You practice. I think we have this misconception that some people are just good at it and some people aren't. Well, people that are good at it just do it every day, and that's why they're good at it. So
Yeah.
how do you practice it? You force yourself into situations where you need to think on your feet, where you need to adapt, where you need to pivot quickly. If you run a business, you don't need to come up with ideas because it happens every day, right? Entrepreneurship is a great adaptability school. Um, but if you're in a job that's you're still have one of those jobs that you can, punch a clock and show up 9 to 5 and do your thing and leave and everything's going to be okay, then you probably have to find other ways to practice your adaptability. And maybe that's a sport, and maybe that's learning a new language, or maybe that's as something as simple as like driving a different way to work every morning. Like I,
Mm.
I talk to people about I ask sometimes in an audience, I'll ask people like, how many of you have self-driving cars, but you don't actually have a self-driving car? Like, how many of you have gotten to the parking lot at work without remembering any of the turns that you made on the way there?
Oh yeah.
Right. Where a lot of us are living on automatic pilot.
Yeah.
And
So
so
you're saying find ways to challenge yourself, right? To challenge yourself, to force yourself to have to be responding to the unexpected.
absolutely, right? So whether the challenges are mental or physical don't really matter. So like my one of mine that I use as a go-to is cold showers. So I will get in the shower lukewarm, and then the last minute or 2 minutes before I get out, I turn it all
Yeah.
the way cold and see how long I can stay there. And I don't do that as like some sort of sadomasochistic thing. I do it because, well, there's some physiological health benefits, but beyond that, I do it because I don't want to, right?
I get you. Go ahead, continue. That's great. I
Right?
love it. Yeah.
So I do it because I don't want to, and I know that when I get out, I will have won a little victory over the biggest competitor that I have to deal with every day, which is me, right? So the part of me that goes, I don't feel like it, right? I like I wanted I had a list of things to do today, but man, I don't feel like doing number 4, so I'm just not going to do it. And if there's no
Yeah.
consequence, I can get away with that, right? But if I force myself to face this discomfort, now all of a sudden I feel kind of emboldened and empowered to maybe tackle that thing that otherwise I would have tried to avoid.
Yeah. I often term this mental fitness, and it could be physical too, but it's a way of, what is that bicep curl for you mentally or emotionally, right? And for you to build up that muscle of resilience. And I think that is unique to everybody. It could be different, but if we don't, just like with the gym, right? If you don't end up exercising that muscle, there will be atrophy.
Yep.
You will lose the strength to be able to bounce back from adversity. And what I want to ask you too, Mark, about is just overall pressure, right? Because I know so many people. Reggie, in his story, for example, is under a lot of pressure. Talk to me a little bit about how you encourage people to manage through when the demand itself gets really high in the workforce. So how do you recommend people handle it?
Right. So, I mean, so one of the tools I share in the book about controlling the controllables, and so it's you can visualize this if it's really just three concentric circles, right? So nested circles, one and then a bigger one and then a bigger one. And in the middle circle, we have total control, right? So think about the aspects of your life, your day to day at work, at home, where you call the shots, right? Everything is outcomes are predictable. If I do A, B will happen. And there's an aspect of our life that's always going to live there, and that's good. We need that stability. Then the next one out is the zone of influence, right? So that zone is the area where I input A, and maybe B will happen or maybe C will happen. I'm not sure, but I know that based on A, one of those two things is going to happen. Like I can guess at the outcome based on what I do, but I can't control the outcome. And so most of our day to day lives there, right? So how I show up at work, does that impact the people I work with? Of course, right? Does how Reggie shows up to work impact the people he supervises? Of course it does. Does it control them? No, they're going to make their own decisions. They're going to make their own choices. The things that are happening in their day to day life are going to influence their performance that day. Reggie can't be a puppet master and dictate everything that they do, but he can influence them.
Mhm.
And then we have things on the outside that we have no control over at all, right? My favorite example is the weather, right?
Yeah,
And then
I use that analogy too quite a bit, the weather. Go ahead, continue.
so then the question becomes, where am I investing my time and my energy? Right? Because every day we have a finite amount of these two precious resources called time and energy. Everybody gets 24 hours and everybody has a certain amount of energy. Now we can do things to preserve it. We can do things to have more of it. We can take care of ourselves physically and emotionally and mentally so that we can maximize our performance. But we all are human. And at some point we run out of juice if we don't recharge. And so if those two resources are finite and we acknowledge that, then would it not make sense for us to invest them strategically? I often will ask people in a presentation, I'll say, look, if I wrote you a check for $10,000, are you going to think for more than 3 minutes about where to spend it? And of course, everybody says yes. And I say, okay, but how many of us waste days, weeks, months of our lives and tons and tons and tons of our energy without giving it a second thought? On
Mm.
things that we have no control over at all, that we're going to get no return on investment at all, that are going to have no impact positively or negative, well, positively on our outcomes. They're probably going to have a negative impact because they're going to drain us time and energy. And we do it all the time. Right. And so it's really about stealing our time and energy back from that outer zone where it's not going to be used and investing it in the areas of control and influence where they're going to make an impact.
Yeah. I think that's being intentional, right? Being intentional about how you use that time and energy. And let's say, the person in this story, let's say Reggie, he's feeling some of that pressure too, Mark, from the executives, the higher level leaders that are kind of putting that pressure on him. So at times there is some interpersonal aspect
Mhm,
to this, right?
mhm.
How do you recommend someone work through that where the pressure is coming from above or sometimes it's coming from stakeholders or peers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, and so we start with the control. What do we control, right? So I can't I can't control their expectations. I can only control how I respond to their expectations. And then I have to decide how much am I willing to mentally and emotionally invest in making them happy, right? I
Mm.
want to keep my job. So I want to try and please them and meet their expectations to the best of my ability. but I have to recognize what is the best of my ability. We can't do what we can't do. Now, having said that, one of the things I also talk about in the book is aspiration and the idea that we need to stretch ourselves because most of us are not tapping into even 70% of what we're capable of doing. So, like, let's be careful not to let ourselves off the hook here. But at some point, we're going to reach our human limit. And if we're at the point where we're saying, look, I'm burning the candle at both ends, I'm doing the best that I can, and that's all I can give, then we have to be honest with ourselves about that. And we have to be honest with the people who are above us, who are holding us to account, and have an honest conversation and say, look, I'm doing what I can do here. Like I can't get blood from a stone. And either that's going to be good enough for you or it's not. And that's not an easy conversation to have. And there's consequences to that. Um, but again, then we go back to the perspective of like, is it worth your health and your life to kill yourself to please a manager at work? I'm going to say it's not. So if you see that happening, then it's adaptability time again, right? Do I need to go find somewhere else to work? Do I need to hold this person at bay and do my best to keep things afloat here while I find an alternative place to work? Or do I need to have a hard conversation with this person to reset expectations about what's realistic? What action do I need to take here to make things viable? Because you can't burn the candle at both ends for very long before there are serious consequences.
Yeah, and I think there's that chicken or the egg kind of argument in regards to, well, Reggie is really overworking because of the pressure, and that then leads him to skip meals. He's not taking care of himself,
Yeah.
right? But it's also kind of the other way, which is because he's skipping meals and not taking care of himself,
Yeah.
he's also more easily triggered and reactive, and he's not able to manage the demand so well.
Absolutely. The snowball effect is real and it can be both. It can be positive or it can be negative, right? So the negative snowball happens more often, which is we fall into these negative habits to cope short term with stress, right? So we're enduring a stressful time at work, so we let ourselves off the hook in our fitness routine. We let ourselves off the hook in how we eat. We let ourselves off the hook in making sure we get enough sleep. We just say, oh, we're going to steal another half hour from our sleep so that I can unwind in front of the TV because I really need that because it was a stressful day, or I'm going to have an extra drink because I need it because I'm so fried from work, or um, whatever whatever the case is. But then that short term relief causes more long term pain, and we end
Yeah.
up making the problem worse. So whereas a little bit of short term discipline to say, yeah, you know what, I feel like having another beer, but what I really need to do is have a glass of water and go to bed, is a little more painful in the short term, but in the long term, is actually going to enable us to endure more stress, right? So a lot of coping with challenge and a lot of resilience is about long term thinking versus short term thinking, and we live in a short term thinking, short term gratification world. Uh, but success in any field, in any industry, comes from long term thinking. Just I mean, the examples are endless, right? So being willing to endure short term pain for the longer term result that you really want is, if there's a secret to success, I think that's it.
Yeah, and it's the perspective shift that you were speaking about earlier, and in your case, Mark, you had a real life example of, in the end, will this matter, right? And then also thinking about your life as a whole. And I think in Reggie's case, or anyone else listening, it doesn't necessarily require you to have gone through something like that. It's just for you to be able to zoom out and think about what really matters most, and would that beer at the end on a Tuesday night and that extra episode of Netflix that's going to keep you up,
Yeah,
is that going to be worth it in the long run when you think about the things that you really want for yourself, for your family, for your overall health and well-being?
absolutely, absolutely. One of the questions that I like to give people to ask themselves is, what would the best version of me do in this situation? Right. And people often look to role models and examples, and that's fine too for inspiration. but just say, what would the best version of me do right now? Right? Because we all have the version of us who shows up. We have the version of us who stuck to the workout program for a month before we fell off the wagon. We had the version of ourselves that shows up for our family the way we want to and has the patience and the kindness, and then we also have the version of ourselves that doesn't, right? The version of ourselves that has no patience and is frustrated and doesn't eat well and skips the gym and doesn't sleep, and like we have both versions of ourselves. So, what's the best version of me, and what would that version of me do right now? And if we can make more of the best version of ourselves decisions versus not, we're gonna have a better outcome.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that it applies to how we show up, the energy we put into our day to day, our confidence, and as well as how we engage with others. And I think in Reggie's story, one of the things that he's struggling with is being able to get other people on his team really
Right.
engaged. They're burning out. And I do think, Mark, what we already talked about applies, of course, to that, which is, well, Reggie needs to start shifting his perspective. He needs to start taking care of himself more and planning and being more intentional with how he's spending his time and his energy. And then I assume there are some other things that you would encourage Reggie to consider in how he's engaging others to get them bought in, to get them more inspired and engaged. What would be some of the things that you would recommend Reggie to consider and how he's engaging his employees?
Yeah, great question. So I think a couple of things. One, more is caught than taught, right? People respond to the environment they're in, the culture that they're living in and showing up to. And so purely by walking the talk, by doing what you want them to do, you are going to elevate the culture, right? You're going to elevate everybody in the room. And so if Reggie can just take care of himself, have the right attitude, come in with positivity, come in with a can-do attitude, come in with support, suggestions, helpfulness, he's immediately going to raise the game, and he's immediately going to help a portion of people in that room. Now there are going to be some who are going to do that on their own, right? They're going to there's always kind of like three levels, right? There's the portion of any group who are driven, self-motivated. They're just going to show up and do their best because that's who they are.
Hmm.
And then there's the portion at the bottom who are always going to struggle, who are always going to have to kind of kick their butt to keep them moving. They're always going to do the bare minimum they can get away with. And then there's the people in the middle. And that's really who we need to worry about, right? Because the
Yeah.
people in the middle are either going to follow the top third or the bottom third. And we want to help them follow the top third and be kind of pulled up instead of dragged down. And Reggie can help do that by setting cultural expectations, right? This is how we do things here. This is how we behave. And and then one of the ways you do that is you set an expectation and then you create consequences for the people that are not willing to meet the expectations, right? This is how we do things here. If that's not you, then you don't belong here, right? And if you're willing to make those hard decisions, then all of a sudden this becomes a place where this is how we do things and the performance level rises,
Yeah.
right? Whereas if you tolerate the bottom third, then they have a tendency of dragging others down because the middle third looks around and goes, well, geez, there's no real consequence to not doing what I need to do, to not being my best, to not showing up fully. So why not slack? Right? If I can get away with it, then I might as well.
I love this. So there are three things I'm taking away from that. The first one is Reggie's energy overall, walking the walk. That alone will create change because when people see that Reggie is is adopting a better perspective, he's after it. He himself is more engaged. It will then create the engagement in others. The second thing was accountability. I think that you're right that there needs to be some of that aspect of accountability, knowing that hey, certain things are meeting a standard, certain aren't, and the things that where standards are not being met need to be addressed. And I love the way you also categorize this. I learned this years ago, and I couldn't agree more and that there are three levels. And I've used the same kind of three level breakdown. You have your top performers, then you have the middle pack, and then you have those that are underperforming. And it doesn't mean you don't pay attention to a certain group. Of course, you're responsible for all of them. But what I'm hearing from you is where you're going to get the most value out of the time and energy that you're putting in is in that middle group, and being able to hopefully get them into that top group of performers. Is that right?
That's 100% accurate. Yeah, absolutely. It's um people people tend to rise to expectations, right? There's exceptions, of course, but people tend to rise to the level that we expect them to achieve. And so if you can set the expectation that this top third is the goal, like this is what we strive to achieve. You might not get there, but I always say like the value of a goal is not what it helps you to achieve, it's who it helps you become. Right. And so if you can say this is what you need to aspire to, and even if you're never the top performer in the company, if you aspire to be that person, it's going to make you better. You're going to perform better than if you aspire to just get by. Right. So l- showing up as that person and pointing at those people who are top performers and saying, you all, the rest of you need to be more like this, and
Hmm.
leading with inspiration versus trying to in other words it's kind of it's pulling people along with you rather than pushing from behind and saying come on let's get moving. It's saying follow me, like let's all be inspired by our top performers. I think that tends to work better.
Yeah. Yeah, and and looking at it from the contrast too is if you spend too much time, let's say, with the underperformers, you may not be getting much of a return, right? Not
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, not to suggest like we should. Oh, if you're a poor performer, like fire them immediately. No, you do what you can, but it's just about when you're a leader, and especially someone like Reggie who has so many people under him. He has like this enormous amount of demand, targeting the specific people who you really feel like you can raise their level of performance to that top performer. It's just a better use of time as a leader.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's no question that the return on investment is going to be greater higher up the ladder, right? Or on the top end of the bell curve. Your top performer is going to be able to leverage what you invest in them at higher multiples than the person at the bottom who also needs some of your time and attention, but they're just not going to they don't have the skills and the mental capacity and the mindset to leverage what you input at the same level. And so if Reggie's got to look at, okay, I can only spend 2 hours with the team this week, I need a certain output, he's probably going to want to spend the greater portion of that 2 hours with the top third and the bottom third.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mark, I'd like to always create a scenario where you have a chance to meet the person in the story, in this case Reggie. So let's imagine Reggie's company, they are holding a big conference, and they bring you on as the keynote, and after the talk you get off stage and Reggie comes up to you and he tells you his story, Mark, of what he's going through. You listen, you download everything he shared. What would be a question that you would ask Reggie to help him maybe with perspective or thinking through things differently? What would you ask Reggie?
Oh wow, that's a great question. I think I would say what would the best version of Reggie do in this situation?
Hmm.
If you were having your best day, if you were at a place where you felt like you're dialed in, you're on top of your game, you know what you're doing, um, because you do, right? Because you've been here this long, you've got a wealth of experience beyond what you remember. You're capable of more than you think. So tap into that part of you. Now give yourself some advice, right? I think we often look externally, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need accountability, we need different perspectives. But at the same time, we have so much wisdom within us and we have so much experience within us. And sometimes we forget to tap into that. And I always say that you are the you are the you are a version of you that's wiser than you were in your best moments. Right? You've learned from all of the experiences you've had along the way. Right? You're the person. So think of the hardest thing you've ever done. And everyone, like for me, that's I survived this transplant and I went and ran marathons. Like that was crazy hard. Chances are good that whatever that thing was, you've been through a divorce, you I don't know, went through bankruptcy, I don't know, whatever your thing is. We've all been through stuff. So think about the hardest thing you've ever been through and then say, okay, I'm a smarter, more experienced version of me than the person who got through that thing. right?
Yeah.
Because I've had more life since then. So if I can do that, then I can do this. So,
Yes.
Reggie, you've been through all this stuff. You've been at this company this long. You've seen this and this and this and this, and you're still here. So if you're the guy that did all that stuff, man, you can handle this. Like, this is just another thing. It's just another challenge. Except now you've got all that wisdom and experience that you're bringing to this problem. So let's tap into that.
Man, that is so good. You are right now wiser than you'll ever be, or that you ever were. Forgive me. You are wiser right now than you ever were before, and then tomorrow you're going to be wiser than you ever were before, right?
Right.
And that's going to
Right.
keep going
Right.
because you're continuing to get life experience all the time. What a powerful thing to tap into, Mark. That's excellent. I love that. And I'm so grateful that we made the time today to chat. I am so grateful that you to have you on the show. And for anyone listening, I highly recommend checking out Mark's new book. It's easily found. It's just markblack.ca/the book. And the name of the book is The Resilience Roadmap, where you really break down those 7 steps, a fantastic framework that anyone can follow to really cultivate more resilience, manage through hard times, and be able to grow throughout the journey. Mark, thank you again, my friend. This was so excellent. I am so appreciative of you for taking out time today and sharing your insights with our audience.
Hey, my pleasure. It's been a blast, and I love the format. It's a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
I've shared this before. I listen back to every conversation that we have on this podcast to then identify some insights and actionable takeaways. And one of them I brought up recently to my wife, Alex, when we were at the grocery store, because I watched it 2 days ago. We went to the grocery store, and today I'm recording the outro. So I'll highlight the thing that really stuck out to me as I go through them. But it was such a great conversation with Mark, and I'm going to synthesize it to our 3 insights and 3 actionable takeaways. First insight, the question of, is this going to matter next week? He said something about health, right? He said, when you're healthy, you have dozens of priorities. When you're unhealthy, when you're sick, you have one. And it's helpful to do that kind of zoom out the way he described and realize that things that we believe are going to really matter won't. Tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, or a year from now. So remind yourself of that as needed. Second insight, not in spite of, because of. So he talked about resilience not as a bouncing back, but as a growing through and adapting to life circumstances. And the thing that I mentioned here about what I shared with Alex at the grocery store was how I'm a smarter and better version of myself right now than ever in my life. So think back to a challenge that you've overcome. That version of you was able to overcome it. Aren't you smarter and wiser today than you were when you overcame that challenge? That's what Mark was pointing to. And to me, that's such a valuable perspective to help you to realize you are much more resilient than you give yourself credit for. And right now, you have more information. You are wiser now than you were even back then. Third insight, more is caught than taught. You want to be able to help others to perform better. Your energy is going to be caught by them. The way you're leading is going to be what they are adopting for themselves. So when you take care of self, you then show up in a way that will then create positive change within your team or family, any group of people that you are leading. So, actionable takeaways, first of 3, close the gap. He talked about the gap between oh no and now what. And if we don't have that gap very close, we can be stuck in that cycle of oh no, oh no, oh no. So close the gap into now what by thinking, okay, here's what happened. Now, how do I respond? And in my opinion, how you close that gap is through practices like meditation, a means to be able to help you to be aware of a reaction and then learn how to respond with an action. Second, actionable takeaway, practice adaptability. Practice adaptability. So he talked about an example of driving home a different way without your maps, without your navigation. Simple practice, but it would force you into practicing adaptability. He also mentioned taking a cold shower every day. May not be your practice, but be proactive and intentional about a practice that requires you to have to be adaptable. to have to be out of your comfort zone. And if you do that regularly, you're filling up that toolbox, as he said, before you need to use it. Third actionable takeaway, set the standard. When it comes to leading others, there has to be that sense of accountability. But people won't know that standard unless you share it with them. And if you're tolerating poor performance, then you're communicating that that is the standard. So we talked about that middle group, right? If you have your A players, B players, C players, help your B players to rise to the level of a new expectation. Because oftentimes that's what people will do. When you set an expectation, they will rise to it. Join us on Friday's episode. I'm going to do something a little different. Lately, my daughter has been talking about poetry a lot, and she's really getting into poetry. She's reading a lot of Edgar Allan Poe. And she asked me just recently, what is one of my favorite poets? Who is one of my favorite poets? And I brought up Khalil Gibran, and I also brought up Rumi, who is a 13th century Sufi poet. And then I started to get into some Rumi. So thank my daughter for this, by the way. And I thought we could dive into some of my favorite quotes from Rumi. 7 specific quotes and what he's pointing to, what he means by them. Because his poetry has shifted my perspective in so many ways. They're so valuable, his words. He just had a way with words. It was so beautiful. I mean, you can look them up right now and find some. But I'm going to tell you what I believe are the most impactful from what I've read, because there's so many. I'll do my best to narrow it down to 7. And what is the meaning of them and how that could apply to your life. So we'll talk about that on Friday in our shorter episode, so don't miss that. Thank you again. Until next time, thank you for listening. I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.